future, economic peril, or prosperity. And what got me going on this project was becoming a grandparent. And so my little granddaughter, when she was born, I was thinking to myself, what is life going to be like for her when she's roughly my age? And so we got together about 20 people and we asked them, well, tell us, what do you think the world, the economic world is going to be like 50-ish years from now? And I'll start off by saying that, we're mainly economists. None of us has a DeLorean, so we can travel 50 years into the future. The only time machine I have is a Timex, and so don't expect us to be able to get everything right. In fact, if you think back, what's the most important economic events that have occurred in the last, 25, 30 years? Did people see them coming? The rise of China and the way that China rose, or a little earlier than that, just the collapse of the Soviet Union? No, people did not get those. And so I'm sure we're going to miss some really big things, okay? But I think the best way to understand the future is to understand the past. And I am an economic historian, and so much of my thinking, I think, you'll see, is related to thinking about the past, okay? So, our title question, what's the answer? So, economic peril or prosperity? Yeah, or. And so the answer is yes. And before I became editor of the Independent Review, I published an article in it about 2005 where I surveyed professional economists and I asked them, what do you think the future of the American economy is going to be? How rapidly do you think it's going to grow? And for reference point in that study, I said, what's the next 60 years going to be like in comparison to the last 60 years? Also asked, what's the next 10 years going to be like in comparison to the last 10 years? Okay. And what did people say? They were very optimistic. There were people saying, threefold growth, or less optimistic, cut it down a little bit. 150% increase in income per person. That's what we saw in this survey, taken a little bit before the big financial brouhaha that we ran into. So a lot of optimism, okay? They also saw that same optimism for the next 10 years, and they were wrong. They were just flat out wrong. They figured the next 10 years was going to be pretty similar to the last 10 years. There was not the healthy economic growth of that previous 10 years in the next 10 years that coming up to about today. Has there been? In fact, we've shaved a good percentage point or so off of economic. It seems like the new normal is about a percentage point below the economic growth of the old normal. Now, I will be talking about economic growth in terms of, percentage changes in income, real income per person, but we mean far more than that. We mean prosperity, which does not boil down to what your income is. I think of prosperity very broadly, as I think most people in the room would think of it, maybe in terms of what Aristotle called eudaimonia. We've got a new center at Wake Forest where I teach called the Eudaimonia Institute. We're studying true human flourishing, right? Not just people earning more and more money and having more and more stuff in their attic or whatever, okay? But, this massive optimism that I saw when I surveyed people about a dozen years ago seems to be waning. It certainly does. And so let me think about why it's waning by starting with some stories, a tale of three pipelines, I call this. Case number one, I'm a historian here, is the Tidewater Pipeline Company. It was built in 1878 through 1879. And so this is the period where John Rockefeller, whom I consider one of the greatest entrepreneurs in American history, a poll of professional business historians ranked him as the third greatest. I'd rank him as the greatest. Check out Ron Chernow's biography of him, Titan, if you ever get the chance. Okay? But John Rockefeller, and I like this picture because it's a young John Rockefeller, okay? And he has just succeeded in creating close to a monopoly in the oil business. Okay, not all the oil business, not the oil wells or anything, but the refining business, and back then it was refining to turn into kerosene to hold back the night, right, to illuminate our darkness. Okay, and so he had created this this monopoly or close to monopoly through, tried and true business practices. What did he do, right? Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. At every margin, he knew his business from stem to stern and looked for ways to cut costs and do things more efficiently. And as the business got bigger, any efficiency saving he found was spread across more and more units. And so he was able to tap into what economists would call these economies of scale. Brilliant, okay? Second thing that he does that's really important is that he thinks long-term while most of the other people in the oil business are thinking short-term. They think there's just a little bit of oil that's been found in western Pennsylvania, and it could run out at any minute. Rockefeller thinks long-term. He thinks God put this there for a reason, and it was for us to take it out, and so we could, and I bet he's put a lot of it out there. And so I'm all in for the long term. And when a downturn came and the price fell, he bought while other people were selling. And he was able to buy because he had amassed a good war chest, and he was the kind of guy that people wanted to lend money to. He was quite reliable. Okay? And then the third thing he does is uses the bigness to his advantage in negotiating a series of lucrative railroad deals. Most of the oil at this point is transshipped in these tanker cars on railroads. And due to his bigness, right, he's got whole trainloads of these things, not just one tanker, if that. And so he's able to negotiate much better deals. But the railroads also realized that they have been using cutthroat competition techniques against each other. And they've all been slashing their prices to ship oil for him and other people just to the bone. And wouldn't it be nice if they could make a deal that's win-win? And the deal was, we give you good deals, and then if we ship your competitors' stuff, we pay you. And this was a way of them not fighting so much to ship their competitors' stuff, let them ship it some other way, and really to form a little bit of a cartel amongst them. The cartel enforcement would be John Rockefeller getting a chunk of their money if they actually competed with it. So brilliant system to set up. And this allowed Standard Oil to become this octopus that you see here. An octopus that has its tentacles spread through the entire oil economy. But whenever a monopoly comes in and charges higher than competitive prices, that creates an opportunity for anybody else in the business, right? The price is high. That's sending a signal to everybody else in the business, get into this business. And so naturally, some people try to. And so my first pipeline is this Tidewater Pipeline Company. While Rockefeller had close to a monopoly in oil, he didn't have close to a monopoly on money. There were some Wall Street guys then, just like now, with very, very deep pockets, and they funded this competitor. Sure, who wouldn't? So what did Rockefeller do when they wanted to build this pipeline, which was going to go from the oil fields of western Pennsylvania down toward Baltimore, Maryland? Well, what does Standard do? He buys Maryland. That is, he pays the Maryland legislature, apparently only tens of thousands of dollars was needed to do this, to get an exclusive pipeline franchise for the entire state of Maryland. Okay. Well, plan B from the Tidewater people. What do? Now let's have a more kind of short pipeline. It's going to take us across the mountains from western Pennsylvania to Williamsport, which is on the Schuylkill, I believe. Susquehanna. There you go. I should know my Pennsylvania better. On the Susquehanna. And then it's going to ship down along the Susquehanna on either barges or on railroad. There's the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad that they've got to deal with. Okay. So Standard reacts, and they have a counter reaction to this. Plan B, let's build this to Williamsport. What does Standard do? They try to block the path. And they try to block the path in many ways. They were experts of what we'll call industrial warfare. Things like telling the farmers, these pipelines are dangerous. They could spill on your fields and destroy your crops, right? We've got some pipelines of our own, of ours. Okay. Second, all the manufacturers of the equipment. Hey, you do business with them, we won't do business with you. Nah, there's still some people who will do business with Tidewater. Third, buy up right of way. There is a right 100 and some miles from Corryville, Pennsylvania to Williamsport, in which I could buy a nice strip of land somewhere in there, and then what are they going to have to do? Well, what are they going to do? Plan C, reroute. Standard buys giant strips of land, and Tidewater reroutes, further south or further north to get around this. So Plan C is they reroute, and you know what? They're successful. The pipeline goes through. Standard can't buy everybody. So what kind of lessons can we draw from this? I'd say lesson number one is that businesses love to stamp out competition. And lesson two, what's the best way to stamp out your competition? How about to get the government to do your heavy lifting, to have them be the ones that create the barriers to entry that are going to keep the competition out? Like buying Maryland or they actually later bought New York. They couldn't buy Pennsylvania. They tried to get the Pennsylvania state legislature to pass a law that would have basically made Tidewater go away. They couldn't. They couldn't buy them all. Okay, good thing for a little bit of electoral competition, at least there. Okay. Pipeline case number two is the big inch and the little inch. So it's World War II, and much of our oil from Texas is going to the East Coast by water. Problem, there are now U-boats there, and they're starting to sink these tankers, and there's 46 of these oil tankers that have been sunk in the early months of the year, of the war. So what's the response? The government gets together with a group of private contractors and decides they're going to build a 24-inch pipeline from Texas all the way up to New Jersey, over 1,200 miles long, going under 233 rivers and 289 railroad crossings and under 626 highways, with 35 pumping stations along the way to get the oil to go from Texas up to the East Coast. And they dig in. Okay? And so planning begins, you can see, in May of 1942, not too long into the war. The first digging begins only a little more than a month later. The first pipe is laid in place by August. They've reached Illinois in the Midwest by the end of the year, and they reached New Jersey by the summer of 1943. They get it done. You can see the map and the route, and there's the guys digging the project and doing it. Okay? They did it! So, lesson here is that government can cooperate with business to get things done if the incentives are right, and if you got to win a war, it's more likely that the fire is going to be lit under you. Okay? Guess what case study number 3 is going to be of pipelines? It's the Keystone XL, and here's our protesters out in front of the White House. So, Keystone XL, I say 2008 to present. So close to a decade, and what has been built? Well, in fact, there were 3 phases to the Keystone Pipeline you don't hear about in the press all that early. The first one to go from Alberta down to Illinois, over 200 miles. Construction began in spring 2008, completed in a couple of years. Good. Phases 2 and 3 are extensions that go from there, Nebraska down toward this direction and have reached the Gulf of Mexico. But the controversial Keystone XL pipeline is phase 4 of this, designed to go from Alberta, cutting through a path from there to Steel City, Nebraska, going through the booming oil fields of North Dakota and eastern Montana. Okay? And so those oil fields are only booming because of what I consider to be probably the most important benefit to consumers in America in the last decade: fracking. Right? In fact, there's economic studies that have tried to look at the consumer surplus, given to us consumers from this fracking. Okay, huge. So, the story on this thing. They put in the application, the EPA rejected it, Nebraska okayed a new route, Congress approved, President Obama vetoed this, and they could not overcome the veto. So what's our lesson here? This is the most important lesson. The more centralized the political power becomes, the easier it is to adopt regulations that are going to harm economic growth. And I think that is the true worry that our friends in our book, Why be optimistic? Because the U.S. has a long track record of economic success. We simply do. You look at our growth, and it's been strong since the beginning of the country's history. Why? Primarily driven by technological progress. And there's now more people in these STEM jobs, engineers and all that stuff, around the world than there's ever been. There's more in China and India, and guess what? Their breakthroughs help us as well. And look at all the great breakthroughs on the horizon that people are talking about, right? Replacement body parts, autonomous vehicles, nanotech, asteroid mining. We recently reviewed a book on that in TIR. Desalination, 3D printing, robots, drones, energy, all over the place. Okay? And driving this is not merely the science, but it's the entrepreneurs. We have a long track record in this country of giving powerful economic incentives to our entrepreneurs and a culture that supports entrepreneurs. Link those scientists with those business people, that's the success, the key to our success. Okay? Yet there are economists who say that whole track record of long-term economic growth, I don't see it happening anymore. You may have read some of these people. There's our friend Tyler Cowen who says that we have picked the low-hanging fruit already. We're becoming a complacent economy. Maybe he's right. Robert Gordon, well-known economist and economic historian, he says after a century of life-changing innovation, human progress is now, slowing to a crawl. Is that the way it's going to be? What could cause our economic progress to slow to a crawl? Here's what could. Do you guys have this around here? Can you still see that? It's kudzu. Kudzu. We've got it where I live in North Carolina. And it actually was propagated widely by a series of New Deal projects to help with erosion. And it's kind of symbolic. Bruce Yandel had an article in the Independent Review saying, this is the metaphor for government. It's like kudzu. You clear the field and you plant this thing, and then you know what? If you don't watch out, it'll grow, and it'll take over, like this poor bus that's been engulfed in the background, okay? Now, we had some of this kudzu on Wake Forest campus, and you know what we did? We brought in goats. Goats love this stuff. Here's the problem. The government thinks we're sheep, not goats. And if we acted like goats and were able to chew away at these sprawling regulations, that would solve the problem. In fact, think about the octopus of the old, Rockefeller. What's the octopus of the new? The government is the octopus now, and it's got far more tentacles. It's a squid. Don't they have 10? And the government spurts out ink. What color? Red. And so, there's our problem. We've got this sprawling kudzu, rampant regulation, and we heard about the cycle, right, from Mises. Rampant regulation, it just keeps sprawling, and we're not doing much about it. Okay, so what else are we worried about, the authors of this book? And I'm going to close on an upbeat note after this downbeat stuff. We're worried about that government red ink and the debt and the demographics, just like John Goodman was talking about, that are causing the entitlement crisis and all that money, right? We're worried about declining labor force participation by especially less educated people. One of the authors in the article, of an article in the book, Brink Lindsay, says maybe we're going to hit peak GDP because labor force participation rates are going to be dropping as, well, there's this safety net. It's called Mom and Dad. You just live at home. Or it's called Uncle Sam, and you get stuck in the glue trap of various government policies, and you're not able to get out of them. Authors in the book are worried that software may eat the world, taking over and getting rid of old job categories, and people not being able to react to that because we've gotten so used to these safety nets and so used to government programs and those kinds of things, that we just don't have the wherewithal that we used to. We're worried about the destruction of the family, which is the primary institution in which not only are children fed and clothed, but taught right from wrong and taught how to stand on their own feet. Instead now, so often there's not two parents there teaching a lesson. When I was born, 5% of children were born out of wedlock. It's now 53% and growing. And so there's just not parents there to teach these lessons that people of my generation and earlier generations learned, okay? And we're worried about that. And we're worried that people are forgetting how to be free. The most chilling of the articles in the book is by Charlotte Twite. And she worries about the government's surveillance state, and especially about education and how the government is now teaching children how to be unfree. The kind of stupid things we did when we were kids on the playground and what, sliding headfirst down the slide on your belly, you know, they took all the slides out. They don't let children learn how to take risks anymore. Instead, all they teach them is play it safe, play it safe. Are we killing our entrepreneurs in the process? So let me close, though, with a couple of quotes to encapsulate this, but then also think about the hope for the future. My first quote is from Jay Budiszewski, who's at the University of Texas. And it's about this decline of freedom. He said, first, freedom meant our noble power of rational moral self-direction. Then it meant the mere absence of restraints on our will, so long as we were not violating the moral law. Then freedom meant the absence of any restraints whatsoever. And finally, now freedom seems to mean the sheer power to act immorally and irrationally, even if the power of rational moral self-direction were taken from us. But my beams of hope are that we still have these powers and can teach them to our children. And I'll close with a quote from a Mexican economic historian who wrote something for the EHNet encyclopedia that I edit, An Economic History of Mexico. He said this: I guess what impresses me most about the United States is that Americans always seem to find a way out of a tight corner. That's so distinctively American. And it's precisely why you Americans don't obsess on history the way Mexicans do. Okay? So I see a lot of rays of hope. I am an optimist, but there are some serious reasons to think there may be peril facing our economy. Thank you.